For 29 years, it was said no one could escape from America's most secure prison. The cold waters, the fierce currents, and the iron bars made it the ultimate fortress. But in June 1962, 3 men vanished. No bodies, no clear answers. Just a mystery that still haunts the FBI. This is the story of the impossible escape from Alcatraz. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary sat like a lone sentinel in the middle of San Francisco Bay, a slab of stone and concrete surrounded by restless, icy waters. The locals simply called it the Rock. From 1934 to 1963, it housed the worst of the worst. Mob bosses like Al Capone, cold-blooded hitmen, daring bank robbers, and cunning escape artists. But this was no ordinary prison. It was a machine designed to crush hope before it could take root. Isolation was its first weapon. The island was only 1.5 miles from the city, close enough for prisoners to hear the laughter of people on the shore on quiet nights. But that distance was guarded by nature itself. The bay's waters were bitterly cold, its currents strong enough to drag a man under in minutes. And while shark attacks were rare, the thought of dark shapes beneath the surface kept fear alive in the mind. Its second weapon was its design. Watchtowers stood at every corner, each manned by armed guards with orders to shoot without hesitation. Steel doors sealed every corridor. The prison's heart was a labyrinth of locked gates and narrow hallways, where every turn could lead to another checkpoint. No matter where you went, eyes followed you. The third and perhaps most devastating weapon was psychological. Cells were small, damp, and often freezing from the wind sweeping across the bay. Noise echoed endlessly, the clang of metal doors, the bark of orders, the distant hum of machinery. Inmates lived under strict discipline, silence during meals, precise routines, and punishments that could mean days in complete darkness. For those sent here, Alcatraz wasn't just a prison. It was the end of the line. If you arrived on the Rock, the government had made its decision. You could not be reformed. And if you dared to dream of freedom, the island would do everything in its power to remind you you would never leave alive. Out of the thousands of men who would serve time on Alcatraz, only 4 names would etch themselves permanently into its history. For men who dared to believe the impossible could be done: Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, John Anglin, and Alan West. Frank Morris was a man shaped by hardship from the very beginning. Orphaned at a young age, he bounced from foster homes to reform schools, and by his teens, he was already deeply entangled in crime. But Morris wasn't just another petty thief. He was brilliant. His IQ was measured at 133, placing him far above average, with a mind sharp enough to outthink guards, security systems, and even prison walls. Over the years, he had escaped from multiple institutions, earning a reputation as a man who couldn't be caged for long. To the authorities, he was dangerous. To himself, he was simply unstoppable. Clarence and John Anglin were brothers from rural Georgia. Born into a family of 13 children, they grew up working hard and learning to rely on each other. They were bank robbers by trade, but also expert swimmers, a skill honed in the frigid waters of the rivers near their home. The brothers were close, inseparable, and fiercely loyal to each other. They'd escaped from prisons before, which is exactly why the federal government shipped them to the Rock. But if the authorities thought Alcatraz would break their spirit, They were wrong. Alan West was the fourth man in this unlikely alliance. A convicted car thief, he was resourceful, mechanically minded, and quick to adapt. West didn't have the swimming skills of the Anglin brothers or the genius of Morris, but he had a knack for solving problems and making things work. A valuable asset in what would become one of the most ambitious escape plots in U.S. history. Together, these men were not simply cellmates. They were thinkers, planners, and dreamers. What bound them together was more than the desire for freedom. It was the unshakable belief that Alcatraz, the so-called inescapable prison, was not as perfect as the government wanted the world to believe. And if there was even the smallest flaw in its armor, they were determined to find it. It was December 1961 when Frank Morris noticed something the guards had overlooked, a flaw in the Rock-S armor. At the back of each cell, just above the sink, was a small ventilation grill. To the untrained eye, it was just part of the wall. But Morris realized it wasn't solid steel. It was thin metal covering a crumbling concrete opening, and behind that opening lay an unused utility corridor, a hidden artery running through the prison. If they could slip into that corridor, they could climb upward, reach the roof, and beyond that, the cold, dark waters of San Francisco Bay. It was an opportunity that would demand patience, skill, and absolute secrecy. Their weapons weren't guns or explosives. They were spoons stolen from the dining hall. Some were sharpened into makeshift chisels using scraps of metal from the prison workshop. Every piece of contraband was smuggled past guards with calculated precision. Nothing could be left behind that might spark suspicion. Night after night, when the cell block fell silent, they went to work, chipping away at the damp, decaying concrete bit by bit, hour by hour. The sound of their labor was hidden beneath the music of the prison band. Morris had timed his digging sessions to match the loudest moments of practice, masking the scrape of metal against stone. It was exhausting work, hunched over in the dim light, scraping at the walls for months. Dust and rubble were carefully collected in pockets or flushed down toilets. Progress was slow, but steady. Color matched to the cell walls were placed over the growing holes. To a guard walking past, it looked like nothing more than part of the wall. But behind each cover, freedom was inching closer. But the greatest challenge wasn't he breaking out of the cells. It was doing it without anyone noticing until morning. For that, they created perfect illusions. Using soap, plaster, and toilet paper, they molded life like human heads. The skin was painted in a flesh tone, and to make them even more convincing, they glued on real human hair stolen from the barber shop floor. At night, the heads would be tucked into their beds, the blankets pulled just right, so that during routine checks, the guards would see what they thought were sleeping prisoners. But freedom from the cell was only half the battle. The bay's icy waters had claimed many who tried to swim for shore. The currents could drag a man away in minutes. They needed a way across that didn't rely on pure strength or blind luck. Their answer was ingenious, a homemade raft. Over the months, they stole more than 50 heavy rubber raincoats, sewing and sealing them with heat and glue from the maintenance shop. The seams were tested, the fabric folded for concealment. They even made life vests and wooden paddles. Piece by piece, the tools for escape came together. Hidden in the darkness above cell block B, the bay was their final barrier, a vast stretch of freezing, unpredictable water that had swallowed countless dreams of escape. If they tried to swim, the currents could drag them out into the Pacific before they ever saw land. So, the plan needed something more, something that could ride above the deadly waves. The solution was as unconventional as it was brilliant. Raincoats. Prison-issued. Heavy-duty rubber coats built to repel water. Over time, they stole more than 50 of them, smuggling them piece by piece from the laundry and work areas. In the dim glow of their cells, they stitched the coats together with thread quietly taken from the prison workshop. Every seam was reinforced, every fold inspected for weakness. Then came the sealant, a glue swiped from the maintenance shop, carefully applied to waterproof their creation. But they didn't stop there. The raft needed to stay afloat even if the bay turned violent, so they built crude but functional life vests from the same raincoat material. And for propulsion, they carved paddles from scraps of wood scavenged around the prison, shaping them into tools that could cut through the waves. The contraband was too bulky to keep in the cells, so they created a secret storage spot in a little-known crawl space above cell block B, the dusty, forgotten void that the guards never thought to check. It was here, among cobwebs and shadows, that their escape kit slowly grew, hidden in plain sight. But the most important part of the plan wasn't the tools. It was the timing. They studied the patterns of the guards, noting when patrols were lightest and when the bay's tides would be at their weakest. For months, they waited, restless but patient, knowing that one mistake, one wrong night, could mean a bullet in the back or a watery grave. The perfect moment had to be calm, dark, and quiet. A night when the sea itself would grant them a fighting chance. June 11th, 1962, the night the rock itself trembled. Inside the darkened tiers of Alcatraz, for men became shadows, Frank Morris, with his razor-sharp eyes scanning every corner, led the way. John and Clarence Anglin moved in silent unison, brothers who had survived life's worst storms together. One by one, they slipped through the jagged holes carved behind their cell vents, emerging into the pitch-black utility corridor that ran like a hidden artery through the prison's bones. Ahead of them loomed a vertical climb, a rusted 30-foot steam pipe, slick with condensation. Fingers clung to the cold metal, boots scraping for purchase. They ascended in near silence, every heartbeat sounding louder than the creak of the prison settling in the night. At the top, they pried open a roof hatch, pushing into the damp night air. The city lights of San Francisco flickered faintly across the bay. Freedom, just a shimmering dream away. They crept across the rooftop, every step calculated, toward the northeast shoreline, where the sea waited like a final test. But not all would make it. In his cell, Alan West fought a losing battle. His vent, swollen with years of paint, had jammed. He chipped, he pushed, his hands raw, but the metal refused him. By the time the opening finally gave way, the corridor beyond was empty. He was alone. His dream of escape dissolved into the echo of footsteps that had already vanished into the night. Meanwhile, the three escapees reached their hidden stash, the raincoat raft carefully folded and hidden for months. They dragged it to the shoreline, the prison's searchlight sweeping just overhead. Working fast but steady, they pulled out their stolen air pump, a small accordion, and breathed life into their creation. The rubber skin took shape, glistening under the faint moonlight. Without a word, they slid the raft into the inky water, the tide tugging it outward like a hungry hand. They paddled into the darkness, the current carrying them toward a fate no one could predict. At dawn, the guards walked their routine rounds, peering into each cell. All seemed as it should, inmates still sleeping soundly. But as one guard reached for a blanket, the illusion shattered. The sleeping men were nothing but decoys, plaster heads with human hair glued on, resting on neatly folded blankets. By the time the alarm rang, Alcatraz's most daring escape was already written into legend. The rock had been beaten, and no one knew where the men had gone. By sunrise, the rock was a fortress under siege, not from attackers, but from the panic of an impossible escape. Sirens wailed across San Francisco Bay. Armed guards lined the shore. Every boat, every helicopter, every set of eyes belonged to the Coast Guard, the FBI, and local police, scouring the cold, choppy waters. For days, they searched. The sea gave back only fragments of a story, a single, handmade wooden paddle drifting near Angel Island, its edges worn by desperate hands. Later, a few tattered scraps of raincoat material washed ashore, clinging to the rocks like the ghost of a raft. And yet, no bodies, no footprints, no eyewitnesses. Nothing to prove life or death. The FBI moved quickly to close the chapter. Their statement was simple, almost dismissive. They drowned before reaching land. It sounded logical. The bay's waters, icy at 50 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, can strip a strong swimmer of warmth and strength in minutes. The currents are treacherous, a silent, twisting enemy pulling toward the open Pacific. Survival, they insisted, was nearly impossible, but in the silence between the official words, a question lingered. If the bay had swallowed them whole, why had it left no trace? But the official story was never the only story. Whispers began to ripple through the years. The Anglin family, still clinging to hope, received unsigned Christmas cards, no return address, no handwriting they could publicly confirm. Just enough to stir doubt. Then came the sightings. In 1975, a family friend swore he saw John and Clarence Anglin in Brazil, living under the sun far from the cold bars of Alcatraz. Authorities dismissed it, but the rumor grew legs, wandering into the realm of possibility. And then, in 2013, more than half a century after the escape, a letter arrived at a San Francisco police station. The words were staggering. "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in 1962. Yes, we all made it." The letter claimed John was sick, dying. He offered a trade, medical treatment, in exchange for surrender. The FBI tested it, analyzing handwriting, fingerprints, DNA, but the results were inconclusive. It was a mystery wrapped inside a confession. Was it truly John Anglin, finally reaching out after a lifetime in the shadows? Or was it an elaborate hoax designed to taunt the very system he had once defied? And so the legend deepened. Some believe the three men rest beneath the waves claimed by the bay's cold embrace. Others are certain they slipped into a new life, hidden among the quiet corners of South America. Their names changed, their faces aged beyond recognition. The truth, it remains locked away, somewhere between fact and myth, between the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay and the sunlit streets of a foreign land. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary closed its doors in 1963, less than a year after that infamous escape. Officially, the reason was the high cost of maintenance and the prison's deteriorating infrastructure. But some historians and former guards whisper another possibility. Could it be that the authorities decided to shut down the Rock because the daring escape shattered the prison's reputation? After all, for decades, Alcatraz was sold as the fortress no one could ever break out of. The perfect, inescapable prison, a symbol of ultimate control. When three men vanished into the night, never to be found, that myth was broken. The illusion of absolute security cracked, and perhaps the government chose to quietly close the chapter rather than face the truth. The real answer may never be found in official reports or government documents. It lives instead in the shadows of history, in whispered rumors, and in the minds of those who wonder what really happened on the night of June 11th, 1962. So, what do you believe? Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survive? Or did the Cold Bay claim them? If you enjoyed diving deep into this incredible true story, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our fascinating history mysteries and incredible escape stories coming up next. Join our community and let's uncover the world's greatest secrets together.